So welcome everybody, I'm Susan DeBleek. You got to see me in the video leading up to this, and now you see me here. What we're gonna do today is I'm gonna do a quick welcome, and then Dr. Lewis is going to give his presentation, and then that will be followed by a question and answer session. And one question that we already got was, do attendees need to have their microphones ready? And I'd say probably not. If your speakers are working, that's what we need today. So you have already been participating in Zoom a lot because you're part of the Master Gardener virtual training. So just so you know, we've got our chat box. So that's a way to say hi to people, say hello, share an idea, and then we've got the Q&A button. So look down at the bottom of your Zoom screen and you see a little Q&A with two little bubbles. So if you click on that, you're going to see this pop up. So if you have a question, this is the best place to put it, because I don't know about you, but I've seen some chat boxes where really amazing questions just get lost in the in the mix. And so this is a way for Dr. Lewis and myself to keep track of your questions. So if you've got a question, use that Q&A button so that we can make sure that we can answer them. So I just mentioned that I want you to use the Q&A. Now I want you to use the chat box. So pull up the chat box and I'm going to see if I have my poll available. So in the chat, so first I'm going to send out a poll. So I'm going to send this out to you. So if your week was a fruit, what type of fruit would it be? So we've got pomegranate, grapes, apple, lemon. Those are coming in. I'll close the poll in a little bit. So in the chat box, I want you to add Y. So for example, I chose pomegranate because there were so many little things to do this week. So if you don't mind adding that in the chat box with the letter and then Y, and I'm going to share those results. So Apple got the biggest wins. So those Apple people that chose C, we want to hear why. And grapes, sorry, was the lowest. Donald, which one did you choose?
I chose pomegranate, and actually for the exact same reason. It just seems like there's so many little things inside my week to take care of.
Right? Well, thanks for making time for this. So I wanted to welcome everybody and encourage you to tag the Iowa Master Gardener program. If you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, share a picture of this webinar, share a picture of something so we can see your journey to become a Master Gardener volunteer. And I also wanted to thank you all for trying something new. We didn't know until July that we were going to offer this virtually. So our county coordinators turned on a dime to be able to offer this virtually, and you all also decided to try it that way. So thanks for trying something new. So just a couple things that you probably already know about the Master Gardener program. So right now, you're part of the virtual Master Gardener training. So you'll be wrapping up sometime this fall. I know some counties are already almost done and some are just beginning. And then you'll earn your Master Gardener intern certificate. So at any time during the Master Gardener training, you can start to log your volunteer hours. So we want you to volunteer locally, close to home, and also safely. So whatever you need to take into account to keep safe because of COVID-19, please do that. And then I also wanted to share a note that that some counties have really specific projects that they want you to volunteer on. So be sure to be in touch with that person who's been managing your virtual Master Gardener training, see if they have specific projects that they want you to contribute to. And then after you log those 40 volunteer hours, so the deadline is not this, not this New Year's, but the New Year's after that, then you become a Master Gardener volunteer and you join this network of 2,000 Master Gardener volunteers in Iowa and thousands across the country. So I just wanted to give a couple tips, as some of you, I know some of you have already started volunteering on Master Gardener projects, which is amazing. And I just wanted to encourage you to focus on projects that can do two things. One is to measure change. So maybe it's the number of people that participate in an event that you put on, like a library workshop, like a plant sale, like a webinar. A bunch of you are involved in the Growing Together project, so maybe the change is measured in the pounds of produce donated to the food pantry. And then also I wanted to encourage you to partner. There's just so much good happening in our communities, and so the more that we can connect to others and not just have this be a standalone Master Gardener volunteer project, but with partnerships. So I mentioned the library. Some of you also might be connected to 4-H youth. You've got county conservation boards, just finding some partners. And I just wanted to give one example. Shout out to Lynn County. So they won the Search for Excellence Award a couple years ago, and a few years ago, 3 years ago, and they have been building partnerships with other organizations to increase acres of pollinator habitat. So that's how they're measuring change, acres of pollinator habitat, and then also giving away native plants. So they gave away 30,000 milkweed plants, and they already built these partnerships to increase pollinator habitat by over 5,000 acres. So feel free to add into the chat box, what do you think some good partners would be for a Master Gardener volunteer project? So shameless plug, I wanted to encourage you all to go to the Extension Store website and order a Master Gardener shirt. You can see pictures of that right here. And we also have a polo shirt, and there is a shipping fee. And so if you live close to an extension county office, maybe you all can put in a group order and try to reduce that shipping fee. So just a shameless plug, get a Master Gardener t-shirt. And then this is the first of 4 webinars at noon on Wednesdays. So next week is botany, so make sure to cover that video before we connect. And then I'm going to hand everything over to Donald Lewis, who's here.
Thank you very much, Susan, and welcome all Master Gardener trainees around the state. It'll be exciting to see what kind of projects you think you might be doing in the future, and then to follow up with you in a couple of years and see what you've actually done. Master Gardeners do incredible things around the state, and it's always a pleasure to be a part of it. And I've been a part of it since Master Gardeners began in the state of Iowa back in about 1979. So we have a long history of seeing the great work that you do. We're going to launch into today's presentation, which is continuation of insect science. There was a lesson material that you studied at home concerning the insect relatives, the insect orders, the insect mouthparts, the insect life cycles, insect development and change. What we don't do in the Master Gardener program is teach you how to memorize a lot of insects. So identification is always a challenge, and that you'll get better the more you do it. And there are a few books and references out there that you could look up the identifications of insects. Just know you can always contact us here at Iowa State University on campus to help you with identification. And identification, as you learned in your pest management lecture, is #1 step. You have to know what it is before you understand its life cycle, its biology, its habits, what damage it might do, and then that leads to pest management. And pest management is what we're going to talk about. So I'll share my screen and show you a little bit of the information we're going to cover. When we talk about pest management, we were talking about all those things that we do that
Sorry,
keep,
Donald. I tried sharing my screen the exact same time you tried sharing your screen. So why don't you try that
uh-oh.
one more time?
So are you seeing my screen now? Okay. So going on to insect pest management, this is a combination of what you learn in the insect lecture, life cycles, mouth parts, damage, and what you learn in the pest management chapter on types of control. And as a reminder, those types of control are cultural, mechanical, biological, and chemical. And pest management is not one of these, it is all of these. These are the things we do on a routine basis that will prevent problems or cure problems after they start. Cultural control means all of those horticultural practices that you do, from going to the garden center and saying, I want this tree. And when you have picked that tree, you have made a horticultural decision. Did you pick a resistant variety? Did you pick a tree that's adapted to Iowa? Those are all important considerations for getting a tree that will have a long life. You bring it home, you have to pick the right spot, then you have to dig a hole. What kind of hole are you going to dig for your new tree? That is a question from pest management, because you've got a gasoline-powered auger that'll drill a 3-foot hole in 20 seconds. If you do that and plant the tree at the bottom of that hole, you have doomed it to a short life. So we know that when you plant a tree, you dig a shallow hole that is very wide. So that's a pest management technique to make sure that that plant gets off to a great start. All of the fertilization, mulching, and watering are other cultural practices that we use to keep the plants healthy. Mechanical controls are machines, devices in action. You've got a finger and a thumb. That could be your insect control. You could put up screens, you could remove by hand, you can pull weeds with your hoe, with your knife. These are mechanical actions that directly take care of the pest problem that you've got. A couple of examples of mechanical control from specific insects. The first one is the eastern tent caterpillar. This is a caterpillar that appears in April and May. The females lay their eggs in late summer on apple, crabapple, plum, prunus, cherry, other related trees. And then those eggs hatch the following year, and the caterpillars make a little tent at the fork of the branch. They leave that tent during the daytime to go out and eat the leaves off the tree. They come back and they hide in that tent at night. One of your controls could be to scrape that tent out of the tree overnight and throw them away, discard them. So a mechanical control would work if you have a short enough crabapple tree or a short enough apple tree in your orchard where you find one of these tents early in the year. Now you could spray the foliage of the tree with an insecticide. That would be another option. But generally, this type of early defoliation is not terribly significant to the tree. And so that would probably be more treatment than is necessary. Fall webworm is another one where mechanical control might work. These caterpillars make a web on the ends of the branches on walnut and other trees starting in July, but usually we see them sort of August to September. All of the caterpillars remain inside the web, okay? They never come out of the web to eat other leaves, so only the leaves inside the web are eaten, which means the amount of damage that's happening on this fully grown tree is really very little. But people think of this as almost a personal offense, and they get really upset and they want to do something. And our suggestion is, don't worry about it. It's a temporary minor defoliation, but if you can, safely prune the ones you can reach and ignore the rest. You don't need to spray the tree because the caterpillars are not on those other leaves. They're only on the leaves that are inside the web. Now, one thing people want to do is they want to burn those webs out of a tree, and that is emotionally satisfying. It's fun to hear insects pop and sizzle and crack. It's fun to smell burning silk, but ISU Extension never recommends fire for insect control. And that's for a good reason. In this case, you could harm the tree, you could permanently damage the tree, whereas the caterpillars were doing a temporary annoyance. And what we have seen is over the years, people will get crazy with the amount of, when they get the fire started. And this is a newscast from a while back where a man actually set his house on fire because he thought he could kill spiders with a blowtorch. We've had similar examples from Iowa, people on the outside of their house trying to kill box elder bugs with a blowtorch. Fire is just not a good solution to our insect problems. In the pest management material, you'll talk about biological control, the predators, parasitoids, and pathogens that will suppress or reduce pest populations. Ladybugs will never eliminate aphids. Praying mantis is really a very weak predator because they're a non-selective predator. They'll feed anything they can feed on anything they can catch. But when we release these biological controls, or when those biological controls are in our garden, they will hold the population down. They just won't eliminate it. So we rarely find it necessary to release biological controls in the garden, but it doesn't hurt if you do. Just realize you're not going to get much benefit from that. And finally, chemical control. Insecticides are a valuable tool for pest management, but the insecticide has to be applied at the right time, in the right place, so that the active ingredient reaches the vulnerable stage of the insect at a point where it will actually work. So using emerald ash borer as an example, we have insecticides that we can put into the tree that will kill the borer. Those insecticides actually go up through the trunk and out into the leaves and will kill the adult beetle as they're feeding. Emerald ash borer is a small wood-boring beetle. It's only a ½ an inch long, 1/8 of an inch wide, but it's already killed tens of millions of trees in the eastern half of the United States, including probably hundreds of thousands of them here in Iowa. It only attacks ash trees. It will not attack the other species of trees, but it attacks all ash trees, whether it's autumn purple, a white ash, or whether it's emerald, a green ash, it will attack them all. And unlike some of the borers that wait for a tree to be unhealthy, the emerald ash borer is a primary invader that attacks healthy ash trees. It attacks in the top of the tree. The female lays her eggs on the bark. Those eggs hatch into larvae that then feed on the inside just under the bark of the twigs and the branches, causing those twigs and branches to die, as you see in the right-hand picture. So here's that complete life cycle. You know it's a beetle, so it has the complete life cycle of egg, larva, pupa, and adult. Adults appear in June, lay eggs on the bark. The larvae then tunnel for the next month or so, month to 6 weeks, under the bark of the tree. They girdle that branch, which is why that branch or that tree trunk dies. Then they form a pupa inside the tree, and they don't emerge as adults until the following year. So the insecticide needs to be inside the tree at the time all this is happening. It needs to be in the leaves in June when the beetles are feeding, and it needs to be inside the tree in July when the larvae are feeding under the bark. The larvae cause these S-shaped galleries just under the bark, and it's a very distinctive damage. When you find loose bark on an ash tree and you peel that off, there will be lots of different borers in dead ash trees. The emerald ash borer is the one that makes this very distinctive S-shaped gallery where they zigzag back and forth. And then when they're done the following year, they make a D-shaped emergence. You can see this dead ash tree. That's just the consequence of all the girdling inside all the branches that happened over a period of probably 3 to 5 years. Ash trees will die within 3 to 5 years of initial infestation if they're not treated. Where has the emerald ash borer been found in the United States? 35 states since 2002. Emerald ash borer has only been known to occur in the United States for 18 years, though there's some indication it may have been in Detroit for a decade before it was identified. So emerald ash borer is now found throughout the eastern United States, all the way from New Hampshire to Colorado, all the way from Minnesota to Texas. and throughout much of Iowa as well. In fact, in Iowa, we have discovered the emerald ash borer in 73 of our counties. There, I got the right picture. And including 5 new counties that were documented in the calendar year 2020. So you can see pretty much the entire eastern 2/3 of the state of Iowa has now confirmed emerald ash borer in those counties. Just because emerald ash borer is in your county does not mean it's in your tree yet. But if it's in your county, it means it's close, and it's time to start thinking about corrective action or what action you're going to take. Emerald ash borer is confirmed through samples that are collected by the state and federal government, identified by a specialist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture before we're allowed to say that county has emerald ash borer infestations. Just because the garden center is selling you a chemical for emerald ash borer doesn't mean you have emerald ash borer or need that insecticide. Just because someone says they saw a beetle, a bright green beetle, doesn't mean you have emerald ash borer. But you saw the pictures of what the beetles look like, what the larvae in the tunnels look like, and that's how we confirm that we have it. There are lots of shiny green insects. Remember, emerald ash borer is shiny green, half an inch long, 1/8 of an inch wide. There are lots of other shiny green insects, and we're seeing a lot of them in samples that are sent to us. So be careful if you're making an emerald ash borer diagnosis or determination that you're actually looking at a small green beetle and not one of these larger green insects that you see in the picture here. So what can you do if you have emerald ash borer? We already mentioned that there are insecticide treatments available, but you don't have to use them. You don't have to treat your ash tree. One of the things you could do is do nothing. Wait and see what happens. It may be a decade before emerald ash borer finds your ash tree. It may be longer than that. So one of your options with integrated pest management is always to do nothing. Just because you have a pest doesn't mean you have to spray it, doesn't mean you have to treat it. You could just wait and see. If you have an ash tree, you could decide to replace it. That would avoid any further risk of emerald ash borer on your property. That's easier to say if you have one ash tree, but if you're in a neighborhood that has lots of ash trees, that could be a real hit to your urban landscape. So decide if you want to replace an ash tree with something else, anything else, to avoid that particular damage. Or you could treat your ash tree with insecticide. Now, if it's a small tree, you can do this yourself. If it's a large tree, you're going to need a certified applicator. But there are insecticides available both commercially and through retail outlets that will protect your tree, your ash tree, from emerald ash borer. If you already have emerald ash borer and the tree is more alive than dead, you can cure an emerald ash borer infestation. But more alive than dead is really a fine line. And if your tree already looks pretty ragged from dead limbs, it may be time to replace it rather than to treat it. If you're going to use insecticides for emerald ash borer treatment, step number 1 is, do you really have an ash tree? We find lots of Iowans who can't tell their ash from a hole in the ground, and they call saying, should I treat my tree? And it's a maple. No, all you need to treat are ash trees. You don't need to treat any other species. Then you have to have a healthy tree for the chemical to work, okay? The chemical has to go up through the tree. The tree has to be living, growing, respiring, doing really well for that chemical treatment to work. So if your tree is already half dead, it's not a good candidate for insecticide. Your other consideration is you will have to treat this tree several times. It's not going to be one and done. You're going to treat it at least every other year, and it may be every 3rd year. We're still learning about that. But for now, figure treating that tree every other year for at least the next decade and probably for the rest of your life as long as you have that tree and live at that property. We think you should be considering emerald ash borer treatment if your tree is within 15 miles of a confirmed infestation. These brown circles that are overlapping on the state map of Iowa show what a 15-mile radius looks like around an ash tree, and it's pretty much now the entire southeast 2/3 of the state of Iowa. So if you're close to a known infestation, it's time to decide. Are you going to wait and see what happens? Are you going to replace the tree? Or are you going to begin insecticide treatment? So this is the advice that we've been giving now for a long time. The treatments go on in April and mid-May for best results. Now you can treat at other times of the year, but April to mid-May is the best time to treat. I said you could do it yourself. If the tree is under 20 inches in diameter, you buy a liquid concentrate at the garden center, you mix it up according to label directions, and you drench the soil next to the trunk. If you have a very small tree, less than 12 inches in diameter, you can do the same thing with a granular insecticide. But if you have a large tree greater than 20 inches in diameter, you're going to hire someone to come do that, and they're probably going to do a trunk injection, although soil injection and trunk spray are also available. The price of 12 to 24 inches is per diameter inch. How wide is the tree at your shoulder height? That's the diameter, and you multiply that by about $10 to figure out what it's going to cost you. So a 2-foot diameter tree is only going to cost you $240 to $300 every other year. It's actually not a bad price for protecting a valuable piece of your landscape. So if you're considering this, you shop around, you get answers to your questions, find people who will do this treatment for you next year. It's too late this year to do it because the ash trees are already turning color. We can't do it during a drought, and some other considerations. So emerald ash borer is a classic example of pest management. We try to keep the plants healthy. We know we could replace and have other species as a cultural control. There is no mechanical control, but you could use insecticides instead. All right. So I should be looking at the Q&A to see if there's any questions that have come in.
I think we're good so far.
We're good so far. Razzle dazzled them. Anytime you want
You
to
got
add
some
a question.
laughs when you talked about the maple, people thinking that a maple tree was an ash tree.
You would think tree identification is one of those innate skills that we would be born with, but identifying trees is actually kind of tough. And it took me as an entomologist a while to pick out ash trees in the landscape. But now I can look at the top of an ash tree, I can see that opposite branching that is a characteristic of both ash and maple trees, and pick out that it's a compound leaf with multiple leaflets on a single midrib, and make an ash identification fairly easily. So tree identification is just one of those things you work on your entire life and you get better and better at it, but it's an important step when thinking about the control options that might be available to us. Well, let's move on and look at another example of an insect, one that most people are familiar with, and that's the Japanese beetle. Most people recognize Japanese beetle. You've seen it defoliate your linden trees, you found it on your grapes, on your coral vine, and all your other plants as well. And you recognize its shiny green head and thorax, its coppery brown wing covers, and then those 5 little dots of hair that are around the edge of the abdomen. Emerald ash borer, Japanese beetle is about 1/2 inch long. It's got that color combination that I just talked about, but its name reminds many Iowans of a different beetle called the multicolored Asian lady beetle. The Asian lady beetle is a ladybug. It feeds on aphids through the summer, and then in the fall of the year, it comes to your house, rests in the sunshine, and they may get in around the windows, the doors, the eaves, and you'll find them in your house in the winter. They are not the same insect. They're not even closely related, but they have a similar name. It seems Iowans don't hear the difference between the word Japanese and Asian. So I'll get a call in October saying, what do I do about these Japanese beetles on the side of my house? And the answer is, you don't have Japanese beetles on the side of your house. you have the multicolored Asian lady beetle. And the caller says, that's what I said, Japanese beetle. So it is a problem with some of our common names to make sure we get them right. Japanese beetle is our worst landscape pest because it feeds in the adult stage on the foliage, flowers, and fruits of over 350 different species. Then for the rest of the year, the larvae are in the sod, they're in grass, they're under the different kinds of grass plants where they feed on the roots. And the grub can be deadly to your lawn. They can also feed on the roots of some ornamentals and potatoes and so forth. But it's a double whammy that the adults feed on both the foliage and flowers and fruits, and then the larvae feed on the roots of the plants. Japanese beetles attack vegetables, all kinds, especially beans, it seems, are an attractive one. When they attack sweet corn, they feed on the silks, and that can interfere with pollination, so you don't get a good kernel set on your plant. But lots of vegetables are attacked by the Japanese beetle, as are fruits, apples, peaches, raspberries. And in that case, they feed on both the foliage and the fruits, causing this characteristic skeletonized defoliation where they feed on the material between the veins, but they leave the leaf veins in place. Japanese beetle feeds on ornamentals. Favorites are lindens and roses and crabapples, and almost all other trees, flowers, and vines, but that's kind of at the top of people's lists. Grapes are also at the top of the list of what the Japanese beetle will feed on while it's here in the summer. Because it feeds on so many different things, and because it causes such dramatic defoliation of trees and flowers and shrubs, people have a reaction that the sky is falling. They feel like this is the end of the world. Life is not going to be worth living because these Japanese beetles have defoliated my tree. Well, the Japanese beetle has been in the United States since 1916. The eastern United States has over 100 years of experience with the Japanese beetle, and they are still there. They still have linden trees and grapes. They still grow roses. They still have flowers. So the Japanese beetle is certainly a menace, but it's not unique to you. Just because it's new to you, it doesn't mean it's going to be the worst thing ever. So Japanese beetle has been around for a while. In Iowa, we have documented it in 72 counties since it was found over in Davenport back in, I don't think 74 is right. I think it was 1994. Well, whatever year. It's been here for a long time, and we have found it in all these different counties, and we continue to add to this map. So if you have Japanese beetle in any of the counties that aren't already colored red, let us know. What can you do about Japanese beetles? You can tolerate the damage. If it's a small plant or a small number of plants, you might use screening and hand picking. But if you must keep the green leaves on your trees or shrubs, you're going to have to spray early and spray often. I'll remind you that although this linden tree on the golf course looks bad because it's been defoliated, defoliation of deciduous trees does not equal death. Right now today, deciduous trees are defoliating across the state of Iowa, and they're not dead. So Japanese beetle defoliation is not reason to cut down the tree. Wait and see what happens. Screening would work. If you could get enough screens on enough plants, you might feel that that's an adequate control, at least in some situations. But the Japanese beetles appear over an extended period of time. They're here for at least 6 weeks, sometimes 7 or 8 weeks, beginning the end of June and lasting through almost all of August. If you're going to spray, you're going to have to spray repeated number of times. Contact insecticides are the ones you put on the plant. Those work fairly well. Systemic insecticides are the ones like we use for emerald ash borer that go inside the plant. We have insecticides that you might like to use that are repellents. That means it doesn't kill them, it just drives them away. And we do have a new biological control for Japanese beetle. It turns out all of our synthetic insecticides work well as a contact insecticide for emerald or for Japanese beetle. All of these are common materials we find in the garden center. The two that are listed as anti-fedants, the third one on the list, azadirachtin and kaolin clay, are repellents. They are not controls. They only cause the beetles to move, and they only last for a few days or until it rains, at which point you will have to reapply to keep the Japanese beetles off the plants if you choose to use those organic controls. I'll talk about the other ones here just in a little bit. Until a few years ago, we used to treat trees with a systemic insecticide called imidacloprid that would go up through the tree and be in the leaves to kill the beetles as they were feeding. Turns out that insecticide also goes into the pollen and nectar. So it is now against label regulations to use this insecticide on linden trees. Very clearly it says, do not apply imidacloprid by any application method to linden, basswood, or other Tilia species of trees. So systemic insecticides are no longer available for that particular control. The new material is called Beetle Gone, or it's called Beetle Juice. It's a Bacillus thuringiensis product, but it's not the BT that you've known from the past. It's called BT Galleria, and it's a different strain that is specific to Japanese beetles. It turns out buying this biological control is incredibly expensive. You'll spend about $37 to make 1 gallon of spray. And if you need to spray 3 to 5 times and you're using a gallon on your shrub every time, that's a lot of money for this biological control, but it's one that is available to you. So lots of options for Japanese beetle control. One of them we do not recommend is trapping. It's emotionally satisfying to find lots of dead beetles in a trap, but it doesn't make any difference to your plants. And specifically, controlling grubs in your lawn will not protect your tree the following year. Japanese beetles are highly mobile and may move as much as 15 miles in the adult stage. They're very good flyers and they can get around quite well. So,
Hey, Donald.
Yes.
So one question that we got, somebody has a linden tree that the Japanese beetles do not attack. Do you have any ideas about that?
If your linden tree is not being attacked by Japanese beetles, there's a couple of 3 possibilities. One is you're just incredibly lucky. You should be out buying lottery tickets. Number 2, maybe the Japanese beetle isn't in your exact neighborhood. And that's one of those things about Japanese beetle, it's very spotty. It can be in one backyard and not the next backyard. It can be in one city or town and not the next one over. So just because your county was colored on that map does not mean that everybody in that county has it, but everybody goes through the same invasion cycle. One year you have none, the next year you have a few, and then 5 years later you've got this population explosion. So it's maybe not for everybody. Now, the third possibility for your linden tree is maybe it's a variety of linden that's just not quite as attractive. So either you're very lucky, they haven't found you yet, or it's a different kind of linden tree. Other questions? Are sprays on fruit trees if you're eating the fruit? Depends. The answer to this and all other pesticide questions for a master gardener. 5 little words you need to memorize and learn as a master gardener. Read and follow label directions. That's the answer. It didn't matter what the question was. The answer is read and follow label directions. So you pick up a pesticide in the garden center, you look, is it labeled for your fruit tree? What is the rate that you apply to your fruit tree? How far in advance of harvest do you have to treat that tree before you pick the fruit? Now, the other thing here is the word safe is very loaded. And as master gardeners and university specialists, we really try to avoid using the word safe. What is safe to me may not be safe to you. So the answer is it labeled? If you use it according to label directions, we do not believe there will be a hazardous situation, and we let it go at that. Will annual defoliating of fruit trees result in them not flowering?
I like that one too.
Yes. Annual defoliation, severe annual defoliation weakens the tree. It's going to have to recover. Defoliation, drought, banging into it with your lawnmower. All of these are little bites out of the tree that add up. And it's death by 1,000 cuts rather than one big swoop. So yes, we do not like to have these annual defoliations, but if the tree is otherwise healthy, we assume it can be, it will withstand that and you'll be able to tolerate the damage. What
And
grub
maybe one more
insecticide?
question and then we'll move on to the stinky stink bug.
Sure. Can I encourage my Japanese beetle population to another neighborhood? Kidding, not kidding. Sure. Bag them all up, take them across the street. What about grub insecticides for lawn? Is that effective? Yes, if used according to label directions and at the right time, which means if you were going to prevent white grubs in your lawn this year, you should have put on the insecticide back by the middle of August. There are very specific timings for those particular treatments. All right, we'll come back to other questions later. Thank you,
Can you
Susan.
share your screen again?
I have to reshare my screen.
Thank
Okay.
you.
You're very clever at being able to stop that share.
So sneaky. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Just a couple more invasive insects to finish up, and then we'll go back and finish our time with questions. Brown marmorated stink bug has been in the United States now since 1998. It's a plant-feeding stink bug, and you recognize it by the light bands in the antennae, the light and dark bands around the abdomen, and the fact that today it's on the side of your house. It's a plant-feeding stink bug that lives in the yard, the landscape, the fields during the summer, and then in the fall of the year, it moves to the house, just like box elder bugs and lady beetles. So you'll recognize it from that. But out there in the garden, they may have been feeding on fruits and vegetables, also punctures and feeds on sap from corn and soybeans, feeds on sap from trees, shrubs, and vines. And after all that feeding damage in the garden, it comes inside and they stink. So this couple from Pennsylvania, their picture get used a lot after they appeared in the New York Times Magazine, sweeping stink bugs by the bucketful off the side of their house. This has not been our experience in Iowa. We have seen a few. People talk about seeing a stink bug in their house. I found my first stink bug in my house here in Ames in 2004. I have found 12. 12 in 16 years is how many stink bugs I have found in my house. So we have a few compared to some of the other situations you see in the eastern United States and in Europe. So if you have stink bugs, our suggestion is to keep them outside through sealing up cracks and crevices, just like you do for box elder bugs and lady beetles. But if they're inside, the best control is the vacuum cleaner. Before you use the vacuum cleaner, you got to get the stink bugs off the handle. So that could be a problem. But again, it's been a pretty small number in our situation here in Iowa. We have found
I love your jokes.
We have found a lot of stink bugs across the state. We're still adding to this map, but if they're in Dickinson and Des Moines County, if they're in Dubuque and Mills County, they're probably everywhere in between. This is just what's been reported to us so far, indicating they're really pretty widespread as a pest around the state of Iowa. Finally, just to mention spotted winged Drosophila as another invasive insect that's fairly new to Iowans. This is the one that feeds on raspberries. It's been in the United States at least since 2008, been in Iowa now for almost a decade, and it attacks healthy fruit on the plant. The Drosophila fruit fly that you know, Drosophila melanogaster, is attracted to damaged fruit, decaying organic matter, fermenting beverages. The spotted winged Drosophila, recognized by those spots in the wings of the male, is attracted to ripening fruit, and then she uses her ovipositor to lay her eggs in raspberries in Iowa. Now, they could be in blueberries, strawberries, and other fruits, but so far it's mostly been in raspberries. There's a close-up of that serrated ovipositor with that little double saw blade. She slices through your raspberries right as they're beginning to color. She lays her eggs inside, and those eggs then hatch into little tiny larvae that begin to feed inside the fruit. The only prevention is to kill the fly before she lays her eggs. So if this possibility of larvae inside your fruit is disturbing to you, You may have to use insecticides on your raspberry crop, which is really unpopular. Nobody wants to spray raspberries during harvest season, but it's either that or go out of the business. Now, those larvae, when they first appear in the fruit, are very tiny. So if you pick frequently, pick thoroughly, you should be able to eat quickly before those larvae develop into a noticeable size. Yes, they were there, but you didn't notice them. If you leave the raspberries set for a few days, they will turn completely to mush because of the maggots that are on the inside. We can use traps for the adults. We check the fruit for the larvae. We tell you to use sanitation, which means leave no rotten, decayed fruit in the planting. You'd have to use really, really fine netting, or maybe you could use insecticide. The trouble with insecticides is there's no one and done. Instead, you're going to start spraying when the spotted winged Drosophila appears in your trap. And the way you do that is you find a fly in the trap, you pick everything that's nearly right. You spray, you wait the pre-harvest interval, and then you do the same thing over. You pick, you spray, you wait. And it's going to be 3 to 5 insecticide sprays to get you through the period of about late July into September when raspberries are ripening. Our synthetic garden insecticides have a 3 to 10 day residual, but they have a 1 to 21 day pre-harvest interval. Read and follow label directions about when you can pick that fruit after it's been sprayed with insecticide. You're going to have to wait that number of days before you pick again. Okay. We're watching spotted lanternfly. It's found in the eastern United States. No one has seen an insect this pretty yet in Iowa, so there are more insects to come. But we're going to stop there and go back and answer questions that you may have. Mention that this was all brought to you by the Plant and Insect Diagnostic Clinic. We have specialists on campus who do plant diagnosis, and hope that you'll be in touch with them as you have questions going forward. All right, now back to Q&A. I get lots of ladybugs on my house each fall. Recommended for treatment, I was told soapy water. Soapy water works very well for insects that are soft and slow. Lady beetles tend to be hard shelled, and the insecticide will knock them down, but it may not kill them. I wouldn't discourage you from using soapy water to control box elder bugs and lady beetles on the side of your house. I'm not sure it's doing as much good as you think. They fall off, they may not die. Now, there are people who use soapy water for Japanese beetles, and I didn't think that would ever work, but there are people that say, no, I come back later the next day. If I come back the next day, they're still dead. So soapy water is a possibility for control of lots of different things. Yes, it works for box elder bugs because they're soft. That soap has to get into their membranes in order to work. I have a bit of a stink bug issue in Lynn County, 4 to 5 in the house. Last year, at least a dozen. All right, you hold the record. A dozen in the house is more than anybody has ever told me from Iowa. I theorized they came in on my fluffy large dog. Yeah, I suppose if the dog lays in the sunshine, the stink bugs could get on there, hide in the fur and come in. I don't think stink bugs need much help to get in. They're on the side of the house, in the sunshine. The sun goes down, the side of the house gets cold. They start crawling in through cracks in the siding. They come in around doors and windows. They come in through the soffits. I don't think stink bugs need our help. I don't think they need your dog's help. But, if you want to blame the dog, it's okay with me. Colorado potato beetles are the bane of my life. Yes, which is interesting. I left Colorado potato beetles in Ohio when I moved to Iowa 43 years ago. I came to Iowa and no one knew what Colorado potato beetles were. They said, oh yeah, we used to have those. We don't have them anymore. But beginning about 20 years ago, they began to reappear in our potato fields and in our home gardens. There is no easy answer for Colorado potato beetle. It's going to take repeated treatments. Kale and clay, that product I mentioned as a repellent for the Japanese beetle, is a repellent for Colorado potato beetle. There's a BT product for Colorado potato beetle. It's not the BTs I've already mentioned. It's a different strain. But start early, spray often. What about diatomaceous earth for Japanese beetles? Diatomaceous earth, vinegar, bleach, a few others have this mythology about them. Oh, I should have added milky spore disease for white grub. These are natural, possible insecticides that have this cult following on the internet. People just believe this works. Diatomaceous earth only works if it's dry and the insects are exposed to it over a period of time. Diatomaceous earth is not an effective outdoor insecticide, but it is an effective indoor insecticide. So read very carefully about the mode of action of diatomaceous earth. If you mix it with the dirt on the ground, it does not work. If it draws damp, it does not work. It must stay dry so it can scratch the insects to death. That happens to the ants and cockroaches under your sink, but it doesn't happen outdoor with insects. Is soapy water effective in controlling aphids on milkweed plants? Sure. You have to do it often. You have to hit them directly. You could just use a forceful stream of water from the garden hose, and that way you wash them off, you blast them off into the rest of the garden. Those yellow aphids only feed on milkweed, by the way. They're not going to feed on roses or melons or anything else. Those are host plant specific aphids that will only be on your milkweed plant, so you don't have to worry about scattering them to the rest of the garden. Someone recently mentioned that Japanese beetles might have a cycle and relent at some point. Any evidence or hope in this regard? Well, we should find relatives back east and ask them what's happened to the Japanese beetle. I mentioned the term invasion cycle, and this happens with all invasive species. You go through this period of life that you have none. Then you find one, and you think, oh, that's not so bad, and the next year it's 10. And then the population builds through an exponential growth. When it reaches that peak, it will begin to moderate and go up and down. Some years a lot, some years none, some years a few. We saw this back in the summer of the winter of 2016-17. After that winter, the population of Japanese beetles was very low. So it will not always be explosive. It will not always be as bad as it is at its worst, but they never go away. What are the tiny white bugs flying around my tomato plant? Probably whiteflies. Whiteflies appear late in the season. We find them on velvet leaf, also known as buttonweed. We find them on lots of different plants. Hydrangea seems to be a whitefly magnet, and they're going to die when it freezes. So I wouldn't do anything to tomatoes at this point in time to try to control them. The winter will take care of that very carefully. Now, if you move those tomatoes inside and keep them in a greenhouse, then you will have a greenhouse whitefly problem you'll need to treat.
So Donald, sorry, I know that worm one, we need to get to that. I know that I typed into some people. I don't know if folks have been to the Horticulture and Home Pest News website. Do you want to plug that real quick, Donald?
Sure. The Iowa State University Extension's specialists throughout horticulture departments, including entomology, plant pathology, forestry, etc., produce a newsletter called Horticulture and Home Pest News. And if you just look that up at Iowa State University, you'll find it. We call it by its acronym, HHPN, Horticulture and Home Pest News. We've been doing this newsletter since 1987. It is entirely online. It is a searchable database with answers to all the questions we have received since 1987, including some questions that nobody ever bothered to ask. So it's this wealth of information, but one caution is we've been publishing it for a long time, and we may have mentioned insecticides back in 1987 that are no longer legal to use. So you do have to double check the label results. But yes, Horticulture and Home Pest News is a great source of information, and it's an entire website where you can look up what we have to say about your horticulture problems.
And there's one about worms here that I bet you want to talk about.
You know, large earthworm with a light band, and they're very jumpy. Let's see, what would we call an earthworm that jumps a lot? We call those the jumping earthworm, and this is a different species. This is an invasive species of earthworm. and they are terrible. They outcompete other earthworms. They eat all the organic matter off your soil. They change the soil texture, and this is not a good thing to have in the garden. Unfortunately, there's no way to get rid of them. They live under the mulch, so you may be able to confine them to some areas, but there is no treatment for earthworms. We used to use really toxic insecticides to kill earthworms in the garden, but those are no longer legal. There is no insecticide for earthworms. So read up on Asian jumping worm and you'll get that question.
And I've heard too, don't share your plants with people, right? Like don't dig up a hosta and give it to somebody across town.
If you have jumping worms, we don't want to transport them. And that becomes a real issue with Master Gardener plant sales. If you're in an area that has jumping worms, should you have a plant sale of donated plants? Okay.
Can I
One more
share
thing about
one?
soapy.
Oh, go for it.
Let me finish this soapy water question. When we talk about using soapy water on plants, we are talking about purchased insecticidal soap from the garden center. We're not talking about the liquid detergent under your kitchen sink because we don't know what that will do to the plant. Ultra Dawn contains all these grease cutters that kill your plant. You don't want to do that. All these high grease cutting, surfactant containing, perfume containing detergents under your kitchen sink can be herbicides. They can kill the plants. So when we talk about using insecticidal soap on plants, we're talking about a store-bought product. Now what were you going to say, Susan?
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to show your last slide so you could talk about the Plant and Insect Diagnostic Clinic.
It's there. We use another acronym, PIDC. So you're welcome to contact us here at the Plant and Insect Diagnostic Clinic. Your county extension office also knows all of us by name, by phone number, and email. So go to your county extension office, say, I've got this insect question, who do I talk to? They'll tell you to take a picture and send it to me, and we'll be glad to help you out and answer your questions anytime.
And we want good pictures, so nothing blurry. Maybe take 10 different pictures of the same thing so that we get really good pictures, right?
Well, just send us the best of the 10. And if it's too small to see in your picture, it's going to be too small to see on my screen. So if you have to get really close, you may need a magnifying lens or one of those adapters on your cell phone to take a good close-up picture. And by all means, the picture must be in focus. That's
right.
that's the critical thing. But yes, we do a lot of diagnosis by pictures now. Very little by the dead bugs and vials that was what was common when I started here at Iowa State.
So speaking of good pictures, I think your camera quality is good enough that someone spotted your tie.
You know, when you're in this business, you look for things that go with it. And I own about 22 different neckties with insects on them. This just happens to be one of my favorites.
That's awesome. Well, I know that the Master Gardener trainees that are tuning in, I think that some folks say, oh, I don't like insects. And then once they get to laugh along with someone like you, I think it makes it a lot more fun to learn about it. So thank you, Donald.
Insects are great. Have a good time. Thank you for being Master Gardeners.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time. And everybody, we'll see you next Wednesday at noon. And this recording will be on YouTube if you ever want to laugh again, if you're having a blue day and you need a joke from Donald. So thanks as always, Donald, and thanks everybody else.